We're removing item 8 from discussion today. A number of us felt that this had not been prepared suitably for prime time discussion, and we're asking the staff to have another go at this for the next meeting. Everybody?
Mr. Chairman, could I just perhaps add something that just might help that? My recollection, in terms of the Ahuriri Estuary, my recollection from when I was across the road there many years ago was that part of the lagoon farm was designated, or was to be designated, as a stormwater pre-treatment area. So it would be well worth inquiring with Napier City Council to see what the status of that proposal was or is.
Noted. Was there a comment?
Yeah, just certainly elements of that were built as part of my involvement in the cycleway network. So 2 or 3 years ago, there was element toward the Onehunga Road section that was realigned, and in fact, just in concert with the work we were doing in terms of building the cycleway. So there I don't know how much of the complete picture, but there was elements of it constructed in about 3 years ago, associated with both capacity and storage mechanisms in the, I suppose it's the northern end of the land court farm.
So is it already there in place?
Yes, well, there's a component in place. I don't know whether it was the whole project, but it was a significant component.
It wouldn't handle stormwater coming from other than the northern end of the estuary.
Yeah, it was the Bayview.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I do recall some of that lagoon farm area being designated. Whether or not that's still in place and what their plans are, I have no idea, but I do recall something like that some years ago.
It's probably material to the site.
Yeah.
I'll move from the chair that this lie on the table. Will somebody second that? I think the concerns have been adequately expressed to the staff about this, but does anybody feel a need to address it further? If not, let's proceed to a discussion of rabbits. Oh, all those in favor? Any opposed? Passed. All right.
Bit of on-the-job training.
That's right. I'm so interested in getting to rabbits.
My name's there, but I'm going to pass over to Campbell, who is just coming now and can talk all about this. So, yeah, leave it to you, Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. So, as I usually do, I'd just like to briefly go over the actual agenda item and then take questions if that suits the Chair. Now, as you're aware, rabbits are a significant issue in our region, have been for a very long time, as they have been for most, or a large number of parts in New Zealand. In our regional pest management plan, we've actually got a provision whereby council in certain circumstances meets 50% of the cost of rabbit control. You'll also be aware that in New Zealand in the mid-90s, there was an opportunity and a conversation around introducing a virus called Calicivirus, or more technically known as RHDV1, into New Zealand. At that time, the regulatory agencies who were responsible for allowing it to enter into New Zealand and have a coordinated release declined to allow that to happen, and it was subsequently illegally released onto farmland in different parts of New Zealand. And it had quite a significant impact on rabbit numbers, and you'll recall that from some of the annual reports from biosecurity. You can see the reduction in rabbit numbers in this region were quite significant from the period around about 1997-98, but now they are increasing again as a result of an immunity building up in the rabbit population to the current virus. Over the last 20 years, Australia, who also have a very significant rabbit problem, have been looking for options to continue biocontrol releases on rabbits. They have found one after quite a significant search internationally, and that virus is called HDV1K5. It's effectively not a new virus. It's a Korean strain of the existing virus in New Zealand. And the current vaccine in New Zealand for the existing virus here also operates against this proposed Korean strain. Australian counterparts are releasing, in fact actually have started releasing, the K5 virus in Australia. And New Zealand has been in a regulatory process here for about the last 8 months to do a coordinated national release in our country as well. A coordinated release is really important because ultimately the timing of when you release the virus has a significant bearing on how effective it is in reducing rabbits and the likelihood of immunity out of the release in terms of the rabbits themselves. So we're in a process nationally. From our council's point of view, we're preparing for a coordinated release probably in May this year. Now that is subject to the national regulatory process unfolding in sufficient time to allow us to do it here. And the first hurdle, which has been released with the Environmental Protection Agency, or their approval I should say, that has been given, and we're now in a conversation with the Agricultural Veterinary Medicines Unit of MPI around their approval. And subject to the approvals, we would look to release here around May. So in terms of the process, as I said, it's not a new virus. It's actually a strain of the existing virus. The current vaccine works for it. So what we are proposing to do is not to do a full public consultation on this. We're proposing to have an operational plan that we circulate across a range of stakeholders and get their feedback on. And effectively, we're proposing to re-notify those who might currently be at risk, and if they are, they should be vaccinating, but just re-notifying them of the release so that if they want to update vaccinations and those sorts of things, then they can. So that's probably my update, but I'm happy to take questions.
Are there any questions? Ben?
Considering the figure of 30-40%, how have you come to that? I mean, how have they got to that as a percentage?
So to be absolutely frank, I'm not 100% sure how they got to the 30-40%. That's a scientific calculation based on the Korean strain operates a little bit differently in that it targets to a greater degree than the current virus those rabbits out there that are immune now to the existing virus in New Zealand. But exactly how they got the 30 or 40%, I'm honestly couldn't tell you.
So on that basis, what's we're talking nationwide 30-40%. We're going to see more than that here or less? I mean, what was the resistance here? What's your feeling on that?
So the resistance in this region has built from about 10% around about 12 years ago through to an average of between 55 and 75% across the region now, depending on where you are in terms of the site. So the average immunity across this region is now very high. I think the 30 to 40%, there's always, I think it's probably going to end up being conservative. That's my operational pick on it. But regardless, it will act on those that are currently immune, and that'll add to the effectiveness of the existing non-K5 virus as well, if that makes sense.
So, and final question, Chair, how long would we expect, how persistent will this be, do you think? Like we'll probably see a noticeable decrease, which will be great from my point of view, keep my phone at rest, but how long will it last?
So that is, it's very hard to say with certainty. The only thing we could do is look at the experience we've had with the previous virus, which has had a very high level of effectiveness for about 10 years, and then it slowly declined over time. And it's hard to be sure, but that profile might repeat itself in a general sense.
Mr. Chairman, is it a South Korean or a North Korean virus? Got to watch out for Trojan horses.
This is our foray into biological warfare.
Chair,
Yes, sir.
Campbell, we have a lot of Europeans staying, and they're in Hawke's Bay doing various jobs, and they always, a lot of rabbits on my property like Fenton's are overrun, but they always ask me if they can eat them, and I always tell them they shouldn't because the neighbour could be poisoning. So What happens if someone does eat a rabbit that is affected with this virus?
So all the technical and health-related information suggests there is no risk to human health from this, and that includes not just the actual exposure to the virus itself, but that includes the meat and products that come from it. Yep.
So if they do eat it, they're fine. Okay.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Campbell, you mentioned that you didn't intend doing full consultation simply because pet bunnies are already the vaccination for the current virus works for the new one. I'm sure I caught the end of an article on Radio New Zealand the other day where they actually refuted that and said that wasn't quite the case, but that's okay. I just thought I'd mention that one.
So there is also worth noting too, though, at the moment in Australia there is actually another virus, a rogue virus, which kills both rabbits and hares, and that's not the one we're referring to, and it's possible they might have been referring to that, because that would reset and kill those pet bunnies. But I'm not sure.
That could be the North Korean virus, yeah.
Carrying their arms.
So are you personally releasing this virus?
No, subject to the myth that biosecurity staff actually do a lot of on-ground killing nowadays. We're mostly contract managers and people managers, so we won't be doing a lot. It'll be contracted out.
Mr. Chair.
Any other? Yes, sir.
Yes, there is another question. Just in regard, following on actually from your comment about the release, I just wanted a technical question about the delegation to release. Does that rest with you or the interim chief executive, or how does that fit?
So my answer to that is, from a technical point of view, that this is, once it's received its national approval process, there is no additional approval process required in terms of regulatory process, and so that this is an operational matter which would sit simply at the operational level. Yep.
And supplementary to that, your implementation, I note that the recommendation of this paper is simply to receive a report, but given that you're going out to a consultation and you have an implementation plan, is it your intent to bring back the implementation plan once concluded for approval by the council?
The answer is no, that is not an intention. That's why it's not in this current report. Ultimately, what we're saying here in terms of the recommendations and why this is just to note and receive the report is that this is effectively it is an existing process around control and management and discussion, and so there's nothing which we would have seen to be significantly risky which required you to provide guidance on.
So
But happy to take if you feel very differently, the only comment I'd make is we'd need to make sure that in terms of coming back to you, if you felt that was appropriate, that we could make sure we timed it and have that guidance from you prior to the need to release if it happens.
Just following on just humour me. If there were a release, for example, of a GMO, would this follow the same procedure whereby the national entity approves it and therefore it becomes an operational issue for you or the council staff and wouldn't come to this council for sign-off on an issue like a GMO?
So I'm not an expert on the legal or statutory process around GMOs, but I've been around this industry a very long time, and I would suggest absolutely not. That would not be the process. It would be very different. It would operate under different statute with a much higher level of risk and public scrutiny. Yep.
So is everybody aware that in basically accepting this report, we are authorizing in effect, or we're basically confirming an existing authority to proceed with this? So if we're all clear on that, would somebody like to move this? Seconder, please. Thank you. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Air quality.
So we'll just get Dr. Kostek to come up. I think Kathleen may have a presentation, and Mark Heaney is also down the back, and I know Councillor Curtin wanted to ask questions about costs, and so Mark can come up at that part of the presentation and assist in that part of the conversation.
Hello everyone. This is really just to give you an update on the monitoring and research we did last year. Normally I'd give this at the end of winter last year, but there was elections and various other issues going on, so it's been a bit delayed. So the outline is just as in the report, the winter PMT monitoring that we've done and our continuous monitoring that we do in the airsheds, a little extra study in Ahuriri, and an Awatāuru emission inventory that was done, and a look at burning activities on orchards. And I'm aware that there are, it's a newly elected council and there are some new members. So I was just going to do a quick recap. The main problem in Hawke's Bay is the fine particulates, and the fine particulates less than 10 microns in size, and they're generally from the products of combustion, but also there are natural sources such as windblown soils, sea salt and pollens. And here we just have a list of the things that PM10 is, the ailments PM10 is considered to contribute to, and I've put some figures in the report for sort of estimates for Hawke's Bay. Thing to note about that is that that's based on 2006 figures, and I believe the situation has improved since then. And also it's all types of PM10. It doesn't discriminate between anthropogenic or natural, so some of those hospital admissions, perhaps premature deaths, is also associated with perhaps things like pollens creating allergic reactions. Now, those listed there are the National Environmental Standards for Air Quality. It includes PM10 and a number of gases. And generally for the gases, well, we do at ambient levels meet those standards, but the PM10 is the problematic one, and that's the standard is 50 micrograms per metre cubed, averaged over 24 hours. And in that standard it says for one exceedance, but different airsheds have been given time to meet that standard. Really, to a certain extent, excuse me, they've only really kicked in last year, or will apply mainly this year. So from, excuse me, yeah, that'd be lovely. So from September last year, so really applying to, thank you, really kicking in for this winter. For the Hastings airshed, really there should be no more than 3 exceedances, and then down to 1 or less from 2020. Napier airshed needs to meet just the 1 exceedance from kicking on from this winter, and that really always applied to the Awatāuru airshed. And a quick overview of our airshed. We've got our Napier and Hastings airsheds with air zones 1 and 2, and also have Awatāuru and Whirinaki airsheds, and we've got continuous PM10 monitors at Mariwa Park in Napier, on Waitangi Road in Awatāuru, and at St John's College in Hastings. Now that's a history of exceedances at those sites. Awatāuru is in that purpley colour, and by and large it's met the standards. It's generally been either 1 or no exceedances. 2015 there were 3. One of those is possibly related to sea salt. It was just that there was construction going on, or site development, I believe, at the bottling plant, which is just to the east of the site. So it was hard to, because you can apply for to the Ministry for the Environment for exceedances to be sort of wiped off your slate if it's a sort of an unusual event. And we have managed to do that for Awatāuru. We managed to convince them that it was a sea salt, unusual circumstances. But in this case, with that construction going on, it was hard to prove. And the other 2 in that year was really just 2 consecutive days where something happened overnight. It was high levels of PM10 starting at about 8 o'clock in the evening and going on through to the next morning. So quite what was going on at that time of night is uncertain. Strange things do happen at Awatere. We have come to our monitoring site and found donuts being by cars around our monitoring site. So yes, you don't quite know what goes on. But and then otherwise, Hastings and Napier. Hastings obviously is the problematic airshed. We've had as bad as 27, but in general you can see that we're now down to single figures. At least we had an excellent year in 2015, but back up a bit last year. But we did the winds were lighter. There were different meteorological conditions. Napier has for the past 3 years has done very well. It never really got higher than 5 in the times it did exceed, but we're now sort of down to 1 or none, at least in the past 3 years. And that's just a graph of the winter average PM10, the maximum and the second highest. Ministry for the Environment look at the second highest just to see whether that highest PM10 was just a complete outlier or whether it's kind of where things are at. So, if you eyeball that, in general, there is a downward trend. We've gone from maximums up above 120 and now more consistently below 80 micrograms per metre cubed as a 24-hour concentration. And that's just another sort of representation. We're at box plot of the distributions, and the distributions are sort of coming down and narrowing. Also on that plot is White Cross. There's a line there at 20 micrograms per metre cube, which is an annual guideline. So we're meeting that quite reasonably now. What we do is try to take the year-to-year variation in weather out of the sort of the equation, just to give us an idea where the trends really are coming down. So we concentrate on the concentrations that occur on characteristic days when we expect we might get an exceedance when there's low wind speeds and cold temperatures, and plotting those up. Again, it still varies year to year, but it's the downward trend. The overall trend is downward. For Mariwa, similar story. Sort of our average and our maximums are coming downward. Our maximums now are below 40. Well, for the past year or so, last year was below 40 micrograms per metre cube, which is great. And a similar story sort of for the distributions. The top of those distributions in the past 3 years have come down quite a bit. And again, we're meeting the annual guideline quite easily in Napier. And similar downward trend in the normalised PM10 concentrations. Now, the NES is under review, and so we don't quite know where that is going. It is likely to include something for PM 2.5, which is the very fine particulates. I'll put up there what the World Health Organisation guidelines are, which may find their way into the standard or may not. So that's 10 micrograms per metre cubed at annual mean and 25 micrograms per metre cubed 24-hour mean. Kind of the feeling is that maybe they might stick with the PM10 as a 24-hour measure and have an annual PM 2.5, but really unsure at this stage. Just an indication of where we might sit in relation to those for Hastings. Potentially we could have had 30 exceedances of that 24-hour mean last year, and just snuck in under the annual. Compared to Awatere, no exceedances of that 24-hour mean and about 5 micrograms per metre cubed in terms of an annual mean. So that just reinforces that a lot of the Awatoto does appear to be natural sources. It is something we've got a source apportionment study going on at the moment to take a closer look at. Because in terms of Awatoto, in terms of annual annual PM10 guideline, we're only sort of just hovering underneath that, about sort of 18, 19 micrograms per metre cubed. Now going on to just a brief study at Ahuriri, just in the past I've had the odd comment about PM10, well, particulates in Ahuriri. So, and I like to work with school, just to raise awareness at schools. So we put a microvol at Port Ahuriri School for 1 year, from April 2015 to 2016. And with these microvols, they've just got filters that you weigh rather than sort of the continuous monitoring we do at the other sites. And so we just did sampling every third day. These microvols are reasonably sort of cheap and cheerful instruments, so they're not to the standards that you would really measure the NES. The results, we did get a couple of readings above 50 micrograms per metre cubed. One was the 58 micrograms on the 4th of August. It was a very windy northwest day. It was gusting above gale. So possibly it may have even been, perhaps silt or soil from the estuary. The one on the 20th, and neither of these we recorded at either of the other stations. The one on the 23rd of July is unusual. The other sites had only about 20 micrograms per metre cubed. It wasn't a particularly windy day, and so it appears probably quite local to the site. And unfortunately with the filters you can't get an hourly concentration, so you can't track exactly when it happened. It may be the case that they were mowing the big field that was alongside it. So yes, it's quite what the cause of that is unknown. Going on to the Awatoto emissions inventory. Now, sorry, there is those where it's got winter and annual, they should be transposed. This was really just done for the purposes of LAWA. We needed to put this information up on the LAWA website. So we got Emily Wilton from Environment Limited to do a desktop estimation. And it's no surprises that in terms of PM10, industry is by far and away the producer of this is for the anthropogenic contribution to PM10. As I mentioned before, there's a whole other natural element at that site. And then we looked at the issue of the open burning for orchard redevelopment. And it'd be great to monitor it, but it's very hard to monitor in terms of that it's sporadic. We don't know where or when it's happening, and at any time the plume could be going in a certain direction depending on the wind. So as a first cut, we thought we'd try and model it. So we got Dr. Emily Wilton to consult with industry sort of representatives, and she came up with scenarios of typical burns, that's of disease material, which is quite small scale, and then for orchard redevelopment. And there's just a note, I think on paragraph 15 in the report, it mentioned 40 tonnes there. That should be 40 tonnes per day over 2 to 3 days. In total, it was around about, for the whole time, it's about 99 tonnes of material. And last winter was estimated about 100 hectares was going to be redeveloped. And we set about thinking, where would we do the modelling? So we mapped the sort of the orchard types of land use, and also where during the winter we had complaints about vegetation burning. And we came up with the sites, about 6 sites where there are the crosses on the figure there. And I mean the modelling is limited by just taking what this one sort of scenario, and also it's difficult in estimating. There are varying sizes of the radius of the plume. There's things you have to estimate about the vertical velocity and the temperature of the plume. And really, when these things are burning, they can be smouldering, they can be going great guns. So it's very difficult to try and capture all of that. We used some assessment measures, including the 24-hour NES. We also just looked at in polluted airsheds such as Hastings, when there's application for a new consent to discharge PM10, there's a significance criteria that if they go over, then offsets need to be considered. We also looked at the regional, in terms of just 1 hour concentrations. Canterbury Regional Council did a study about burn-offs in their region, and that was a figure, 200 micrograms per metre cube was a figure they looked at, thinking that if you had a 1 hour concentration like that, then you'd probably be a 24-hour concentration close to the 50 micrograms per metre cube mark. And then there was, we just kind of looked for the lowest standard we could find anywhere for a 1 hour, and the state of Idaho, there was a 1 hour caution level, 64 micrograms per metre cube that they had. And so that's a picture of the results. Generally, the highest impacts were mostly confined within 200 metres. That's in terms of any exceedance of the 24-hour criterion or the 1 hour criterion. So potentially remaining within the boundary of the property, depending on how big and how far away they were away from their boundary. The significance criterion could be exceeded up to 2 kilometres from the source, and Golders just put in some discrete receptors that they looked at what the concentrations were at those points around the fires, and in those cases none of them really exceeded the NES or the 1 hour sort of limits that we'd placed on them. The receptors that were most affected were the ones around that Flaxmere, the one that's located around Flaxmere, that burn off there. And that's just putting them in perspective to where they are in the actual airsheds and our monitoring sites. So in terms of our monitoring site, I mean, that would be consistent because we're not really seeing at our monitoring sites, when you look at the hourly profile, you're not really seeing what appears to be orchard burns. So they don't appear to be impacting our sites. Certainly, if that's not to say that there aren't the local effects. I mean, if you are within 100 to 200 metres of the fire, it won't be a pleasant experience at all. So yes, that's pretty much the wrap of the monitoring research, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that you said there were, in one of those maps you had gazetted airsheds. So I assume that's some sort of, when you say gazetted, that means that someone from Wellington's told us that they're airsheds in particular we have to look after. And is that why, for example, why we don't do measuring in Waipukurau and Waipawa or Wairoa?
Yeah, there was a process as when the NES was first came into being, where NIWA did some modelling of pretty much for, I think, the nation, looking at where PM10 was likely to be exceeded in places. So that was a starting point. And then that was further looked at with further modelling and some monitoring contributing to narrow down those issues, and that was on part of the council. This council did that work, and so narrowed down the issues in the air zones. And we have done, to do a check, I have done just the cheap and cheerful microphone monitoring in Waipukurau and Waipawa, and during the time that we did that monitoring, there weren't any exceedances.
That's cool.
Firstly, it's good to see that the trend is downwards, but if we have the wrong weather conditions this coming winter, it's boots to buttons that will exceed the thresholds that have been set in Hastings in particular. So what are the consequences of not reaching those targets in the timeframes we've got, which is a highly likely scenario?
So one of the, so the NES is a regulation, so it's law, so we've got a task to achieve it. One of the critical issues that confronts us if we don't achieve the NES is that we will be unable to issue discharge permits for that affect air quality within the airshed. So that could have a significant and material effect on industry, which is why there's a reasonably hefty program around the Heat Smart program to try and reduce the domestic burn emissions to the point where we are meeting the NES. Otherwise it will start impacting on other parts of the community.
Okay, so are we aware in the airshed in Hastings in particular, concern, are we aware of any industries that might be affected by that?
Off the top of my head I don't know, but yes, I couldn't tell off the top of my head. I'd have to go and have a look.
That might be quite important to know, so
Sure.
I think probably if we could get some information on that.
And it's not only existing, but it's any new, so it would curtail development potentially.
Can I just add that that is all, I mean, that part, PM10 and the NES review, that is all part of the review, so whether that stays is still with them. It might get worse.
It's only likely that I think they'll relax it. I think it may get tougher rather than easier, would be my sense.
Thank you, Chair. Kathleen, could you put that photo of that fire up again?
That one?
Hold it. That's also on page 152. I suggest everyone have a look at that. So that's green matter been burning there, and you said 200 metres. Well, my house is 300 metres from an industrial burn, like of green matter. Not quite as bad as that, but because that's a hedge by the looks of things. And let me tell you, my house was unlivable. Unlivable. And in the morning, we left, and in the morning, the whole place was covered in ash. And I was sick at the time, so I was not very happy. And I'm still not very happy. I'm not very happy with this report. I'm not. A friend of mine went up the same time up Tomato Peak. There were 11 fires like this, like that, in Heratonga. And the place is just a disaster. And I have lots of, during these burns, these industrial burns, it is a cost, and I take your point in, I've been a fruit grower all my life, but this is a cost of operations. I know I'm giving a speech, but I have some questions here, because I don't agree with 200 metres. It certainly, in my instance, was a lot worse. Some of these numbers here, I mean, these deaths, I mean, I can't believe we're killing people at this rate, but nevertheless, that's quite a stunning figure. But we're certainly not doing anyone's health any good when we have these industrial burns. And I'm sick of fruit growers transferring their problem to the community and polluting the community like that, because if your house is within 100 metres of that, and I sort of raised that too, the people who did my one had a consent which said the pollution had to go over my house. Well, it said couldn't go over Havelock and Hastings. So it's by definition it was a southerly. It had to go over my house. So it's okay to kill a few people, but not Havelock and Hastings. And I understand that. I mean, knock off a few. I get that. Knock off the chairman. But, you know, it's just ridiculous policy that we say, oh, you can have this industrial burn and burn green matter, but your consent says it can't go over Havelock or Hastings, but it can go over all these other people because there's less of them and they're not complaining. It is an absurdity. And my question is, when are we going to deal with this as a council? Because this issue is just going to niggle away at the community that it's affecting time and time again. We have to deal with it. And when are we?
So obviously that's a question Kathleen can't answer for you. But perhaps Kathleen, if you just flick back to that...
Put these pictures on your wall.
I was just going to say, if you flick back to that map that had that one there, no, next one.
Yeah, I'm right in the middle of that.
That one there. I guess the point you raise is a good one, Councillor Graham, in as much as if you've got 20 of those things, or 25 or 30 of them in one day, that's a fair chunk of the populated area of Hawke's Bay that's being affected. So that it is an issue, as well as, you know, your immediate effects, but depending on how you want to assess compliance with a standard, it's covering a fair chunk of the region that is an issue, and it's certainly something that's this council, it's well within your mandate to look at whether you want to change the policy around that. And just the final point I'd make is that your neighbour didn't have a consent, he had a permit. So we don't give them consents for that for fires, but he would have had a fire permit from the district council. Yeah.
I think Neil is next, and then Peter.
Yes, just clearly, in looking at the effects of PM10 on brain functioning, it's clearly had an effect.
I'll deal with you later.
Mr. Chair, Councillor Graham raised a very important issue, and I want to ask this question in regard to your paragraph 2 in the background, where you identify and highlight 113 premature adult deaths, 54 hospital admissions, 411 million costs. Now, what you've demonstrated is, what I say, is quite a dramatic drop in PM10 exceedances, extraordinary in such a short space of time. So clearly we've got a dramatic effect from this piece of policy. I've got two questions. Has there been a translation of the effects of the drop in exceedances with those health outcomes you've identified? And secondly, well, less people dying and less is there a correlation with the District Health Board, for example, around hospital admissions or less people dying? Because we justified the expenditure on that basis. Now we've got the opportunity to measure the outcome, which is wonderful. But the other aspect of this, and we've talked about this earlier today in our workshop, is the public. We do a lot of work here on things such as policy development, and we spend a huge amount of ratepayer money doing it. And my estimate, which I'd like to see confirmed, is something like 10 million over the 10 years of this policy implementation for the national standard. Is that the quantum that we have spent in one form or another, including subsidies for burners? What are the effects? So what did we spend? What are the outcomes? And is this a story we should be telling the big wide world of Hawke's Bay who pay that money, that that's what they got, bangs for bucks?
Just in terms of the figures around the in that paragraph 2, that was that's sort of what PM10 contributes to those things, and that was a nationwide study, more like and it was estimated for each region coming down from a national level, just in terms of PM10, correlating PM10 concentrations with both studies here and overseas of what that translates to. So that is an estimate, not a direct measure in conjunction with our local DHB. That was kind of a nationwide estimated study. So at this point, that study has not been updated with the new figures. And in terms of, I don't know, Mark might have any comments about DHB, but it's in a population our size, it's quite, somewhere like Christchurch, it's probably easier to get those sorts of correlations. In a population our size, I believe it's quite difficult to do the appropriate studies to determine quite those exact links. But Mark, are you able to?
So perhaps just before Mark does, Councillor, what I was going to suggest, because I think that really relevant and important questions to ask, because we've had a pretty successful Heat Smart program running for a number of years, and it's a substantial amount of money that's passed through, not a cost to the council, it's a pass through because we're cost recovering that. How effective has it been, both in terms of what does the science tell us and the monitoring, and what can we say about the community impacts? I was going to suggest that Kathleen had mentioned that the NES is under review. We expect that there's going to be some clarity on that reasonably soon. It's perhaps at the time when the NES is coming to us in a draft in terms of its change, we bring to you kind of this is where we've got to in terms of the overall program to date, and this is what it's going to look like with the new NES, that whatever that looks like. So we could bring you both bits of work in a paper that gives you that reflection on the history and what we've achieved, as well as what the future might look like under a new NES, whatever that looks like.
Let me respond to that, because you're addressing a concern I had about this paper. I appreciate having all this information, but I didn't regard this as a governance paper at all. What it said was we have one part of our region that has 7 exceedances, and then it suggests that we're kind of scratching our heads as to whether, we're going to be able to make any improvement in that. Peter asked a question along those lines. We know Rex has a concern about orcharding, and so we get a paper that is typical of a lot of other papers we get that flag, oh, here's an issue, Ahuriri is going down the toilet, or something else is happening. And then we get this kind of comment that says, yeah, well, we didn't answer any of the questions you have, really, as governors. We aren't able to tell you whether it's actually having any impact based on the dollars spent. We don't know what we're going to do about the fact that Hastings continues to have exceedances, and the law isn't going to go away. And we have an irate chairman who is getting sick in his house. And so, to me, this is a paper we should take as read, or it should come with, well, what do you want us to do? What do you want from us, other than to say, well, thank you for the paper? I just don't see the point. So you're saying now, well, you'll come back in 6 months or 3 months or whatever, and have a plan of action of some sort for us, or some other measures. That's fine. Well, then I would have said, we'll come back then, not. We've just spent more than a half an hour on this subject and have no governance question answered.
So Chair, valid points, and again, that's what's not a decision item, it's for information. It's to give you the state of the play, the state of the environment, if you like, in terms of our monitoring program. Where to from here? Well, we weren't actually asked any specific questions on this report. This is a report that we generate under our sort of Section 35 obligations of the Act. But that said, if you want, and we can and we will bring back to you, as we do regularly, updates and revisions of things like Heat Smart. So every year we have an operational report and an operational plan presented that incorporates the what next, where have we got to, and what do we think needs to be tweaked or changed or added to. Like I say, we'll bring together all of that information with the NES changes to say, well, we've dutifully gone and fulfilled our obligations to try and achieve the NES. We've either got there or we haven't. Here are the things that we would need to change to get there. And if there's a revision to the NES, here are the additional things, be it policy change or further subsidisation or schemes like Heat Smart to try and achieve it, that could be contemplated to deliver those things. So happy to do that.
Well, just speaking for myself, but I am the chairman of the committee, I would say I would much rather see a paper like that than a stream of informational papers that leave us scratching our heads wondering, well, now what, And I think, I'm going to try to exert an influence over the next 3 years to move toward using this committee's time to actually address issues as opposed to getting informational briefings about issues. That's my only point.
So, just carrying on from that comment and going back to the industrial burning that Rex is on several occasions expressed his concerns about. 90% of those industrial burnings are orchards that have been removed, pushed up into a big pile and burnt. That's how it happens. And there's actually a couple of quite easy solutions to that problem. The first is to leave the material that's been removed from the ground to dry more, so it doesn't generate so much smoke. That's quite often an issue because the orchardist that's done this probably wants to replant reasonably soon, so he wants to get rid of it. So probably the alternative and better solution is to actually go through that material and remove the larger limbs. And it can be used as firewood, and it's bloody good firewood actually. And it would be possible, I would have thought, to connect the grower that's done the removal with some of the firewood companies that are always looking for sources of firewood so that they can come in and chop it up. And then what's left wouldn't even need to be burnt, it could be mulched. So there's actually a pretty easy solution to this if we put the right people together to talk to each other, and that's the task that we should be taking on to improve this. So that's what I'd like to see as a solution that we can profit of the people involved. And it should be best practice in Pip Fruit New Zealand's manual for its orchardists to do such a thing.
Just about the PM10. Down our way, especially Ma here, you know, and this is a different subject, with the big skyrockets flying up in the air. You know, I understand you guys have got you know, fire burning here, but we're going to have, you know, 15-ton rockets gearing on a trajectory of 42,000 feet. You know, and it could be twice a month. You know, who actually monitors the air?
The activity was consented, and I'm just trying to recall off the top of my head whether they have air monitoring conditions. I'm pretty sure they do have monitoring requirements. And look, just again for context for you, the so valid points around the fact that you've got this big bit of carbon fibre racing into the sky. The assessments formed a view that it was about the same as a 747 aircraft taking off in terms of emissions, because it's a pretty rapid acceleration into the atmosphere, so the effect at a lower level is, on a scale of things, short-lived and relatively minor.
Can I just add on that? The fuel's primarily oxygen and the burning's extremely clean, and when the big smoke plume you see is actually steam, so they pump water in very large volumes at the base of the rocket to stop the vibrations from the thrust, if you like, reverberating upwards and blowing the rocket apart. So it's actually not smoke, it is steam that you see. When you see things, you know, overseas taking off, that is all steam that you're seeing.
Just with that, it's good to know that, because we don't want, you know, a lot of our people at the marae, you know, saying, you know, what's all that smoke? You know, it's just vapour. You know, at least we can clarify that before they, you know, make a stand.
So, councillors, unless there are other burning questions on this point, we have 3 other agenda items to get through in less than an hour. Do you want to belabor this further?
Yes, I do, thank you. Sorry, Chair. Just one further question. Yep, localised issues with regards to PM10. I know, for example, like in the corner of Hyderabad and George's Drive, there is a hell of a problem with vehicle emissions around the residents that live in that particular area, in that particular location. Very, very localised, because at the lights all the trucks stop and away they go with all the diesel particulates getting spewed out all over the place. Is that an issue that gets dealt with under this sort of monitoring, or is there another avenue to deal with that challenge?
We do, and this year we are planning again. This is we monitor like the gases, do traffic roadside monitoring once every 4 to 5 years, and our location is mainly because, well, one of the Napier location is at the corner of Hyderabad and Taradale Road. that we do that there. That was identified as one of the main spots. Probably the only, and that is good in that it is very busy, and there's a little, if you're aware, there's kind of a little plantation there that we can put because it takes a big trailer. Probably the only problem of shifting it to the corner of George's Drive and Hodgebed is it really be. Oh, there's that little yes, possibly, but sort of we're probably the other site might capture a lot of that anyway. But in the past, at that site, the national environmental standards for those gases haven't been exceeded.
I'll move the
Someone care to
report.
move accepting this report?
I'll move.
Moved, second.
Right.
Thank you. All those in favour? Wish to speak?
Just briefly, Chair, just a bit of a plug for the staff here. It's very hard to defend yourself when the Chair has a go at you. I worked that out 6 years ago. So no matter where you sit around this table, if the Chair's got a view that you can't respond to, it's pretty hard. So I'm going to have a plug for the staff here. It's actually up to this committee to change its way it does business, not the staff. They'll bring back the reports. This is an incredible report. Progress has been good. If we want it better, we instruct them.
Fair enough.
Chair, can I?
Reluctant to do that. Alan, did you wish to comment?
No.
Anybody else wish to comment? All those in favour of accepting the report, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?